Dr. Tom Riley was finishing his night shift in the medical bay of the trade vessel Meridian when he heard something that made his blood run cold. A low, pained sound echoed through the communication system, something between a growl and a whimper. He checked the ship's sensors and noticed unusual activity in Cargo Bay 3. Nobody should be down there at this hour. Tom grabbed his jacket and headed down the metal corridors, his footsteps echoing in the quiet ship. When he reached the cargo bay, the smell hit him first, a mix of decay and infection so thick it made him gag. Then he saw it. The creature was massive, easily the size of a small car, with fur that had once been golden but now hung matted and filthy against its skeletal frame. It was curled up in the corner, and Tom could see open sores covering most of its body. The animal's breathing was shallow and labored, like every breath took everything it had left. Its eyes were closed, but they flickered occasionally as if the creature was trapped in some fevered nightmare. Tom's medical training kicked in immediately. He recognized the signs of severe parasitic infection, the kind that usually ended in death within days. He pulled out his handheld scanner and ran it over the beast. The readings made him wince. The parasite count was off the charts, and from what he could see, they had infiltrated nearly every major organ system. He reached out slowly, carefully, and placed his hand on the creature's neck. There was a pulse, weak but steady. The animal didn't move, too sick to even register the touch. Tom felt something shift inside his chest, that pull he'd always felt since childhood when he encountered something suffering. He'd become a doctor because of that feeling. He couldn't ignore it now. The next morning, Tom found Captain Morris in the command center. He knew what he had to do, but he also knew it would be complicated. "Captain, we have a problem," Tom said, pulling up the scanner readings on the display screen. "There's an animal in Cargo Bay 3. It's in critical condition." Captain Morris barely glanced at the data. He was a practical man, the type who thought in terms of efficiency and profit margins. The Velic left it there. "It's their problem now. Why are you bringing this to me?" "Sir, it's a living creature. It's suffering. We have medical facilities. We could." "Could what, doctor?" The captain's voice was sharp. "Waste resources on an animal that's going to die anyway?" The Velic Collective already made their decision. They deemed it unsurvivable and left it behind. "That's not our concern." Tom felt frustration building in his chest, but he kept his voice steady. "The Velic said it was unsurvivable with their medical knowledge. We might have different options." "No." Captain Morris turned back to his console. "I want that thing removed from this ship. Take it to the docking station and have the local authorities handle it. We're not getting involved in Velic business, and we're definitely not wasting time and supplies on a dying alien beast." "That's final." Tom left the command center knowing he couldn't accept that answer. He'd taken an oath as a doctor, to preserve life and reduce suffering. That oath didn't have an expiration date based on what species an animal belonged to or what some corporate collective thought about its viability. That night, Tom made a decision that would change everything. He waited until the graveyard shift took over and most of the crew was sleeping. He took a medical transport unit down to Cargo Bay 3 and found the creature exactly where he'd left it, perhaps even weaker than before. "Hey buddy," Tom whispered, keeping his voice soft and calm. "I'm not going to let them throw you away." He worked carefully, making sure the creature was sedated enough to move without causing additional trauma. The animal weighed far more than Tom had expected, but with the help of the transport unit's hydraulic system, he managed to get it loaded. The journey to the medical bay took longer than he wanted. Every shadow seemed to hide a crew member who might ask questions he couldn't answer truthfully. He settled the creature into one of the larger medical beds and covered it with a thermal blanket. Up close, now that he had time to examine it properly, Tom could see the intelligence behind those closed eyes. This wasn't just some mindless animal. There was something there, something aware and scared and fighting to survive. Tom ran a full diagnostic suite of tests. The results were grim but not hopeless. The parasites had created a complex ecosystem inside the creature's body, and simply killing them might destroy the host in the process. It would take everything Tom had to figure this out. He sat down on a nearby stool and made a choice he knew would have consequences. He was going to save this creature's life, no matter what it took. Captain Morris's orders, protocol, alien politics. None of it mattered compared to what he knew he had to do. Tom pulled up his medical database and got to work. It was going to be a long night and many more would follow. But for the first time in his shift, the doctor felt certain about something. He wasn't going to let this animal die alone in a cargo bay while everyone turned away. Tom didn't sleep that night. He sat in the medical bay with the creature, running scan after scan, watching the data scroll across his screens like some kind of nightmare he couldn't wake up from. Every reading made the situation look worse. The more he dug into the parasite's biology, the more he realized how badly the Velic had misunderstood what they were dealing with. By dawn, Tom had filled 3 digital notebooks with observations and preliminary analysis. The parasite wasn't just one organism, it was more like an entire ecosystem. There were at least 7 different species of parasites working together, creating a network of infection that had spread through almost every vital system in the creature's body. The liver was compromised. The kidneys were barely functioning. The heart was struggling under the pressure of the infection. And worst of all, the creature's own immune system had started attacking itself, which meant anything that might kill the parasites could trigger a cascade reaction that would destroy the host. Tom looked at the creature sleeping on the medical bed. He'd started thinking of it as male, though he had no real way of knowing, and felt the weight of the problem pressing down on him. This was beyond anything he'd dealt with in his medical career. He'd studied parasitology in medical school, sure, but that was mostly about the parasites humans encountered. Earth parasites. Familiar organisms that humanity had developed treatments for over thousands of years. This was different. This was alien biology at its most complex and most deadly. Tom made a decision. He couldn't solve this alone, and he knew exactly who to call. Dr. Rebecca Walsh was the lead parasitologist at the Earth Medical Research Center in Singapore. Tom had done his residency there years ago, and Rebecca had been his mentor. She was brilliant, patient, and most importantly, she thought in ways that went beyond conventional wisdom. If anyone could help him figure this out, it was her. The communication delay was going to be brutal. Earth was nearly 8 light hours away depending on the current position of the planets, but Tom couldn't worry about that. He recorded a detailed message attaching all his scans, all his data, and his preliminary analysis. He didn't hold back about the severity of the situation or how unconventional his approach was going to have to be. "Rebecca," he said into the recording, his voice tired but determined, "I know this is going to sound crazy, but I need your help. I have a patient, a non-human patient, that the aliens who brought it on my ship decided was beyond saving. But I don't think it is. Not yet, anyway. The parasite situation is unlike anything I've seen before. I'm sending you everything. When you get this, please tell me if I'm wasting my time, or if there's a way through this." He hit send and felt a little bit of the tension ease from his shoulders. Now all he could do was wait for a response that wouldn't arrive for at least 16 hours, probably more. While he waited, Tom got to work. He spent hours studying the creature's biology in detail. He took tissue samples, blood samples, and used every scanning technology available on the ship to map out exactly where the parasites had established themselves. He created detailed 3-dimensional models of the infection patterns, looking for weak points, for places where he might be able to intervene without causing more damage. The medical bay's computer system became his workspace. Tom filled every available screen with data, charts showing parasite life cycles, graphs showing organ function levels, images of cellular damage. He barely left the room except to grab coffee and a sandwich from the crew cafeteria, always making sure to time it when the fewest people would be around to ask questions. On the second day, while Tom was reviewing his notes for probably the 100th time, the computer chimed. Rebecca's response had arrived. Her message was long and detailed, and it started with something Tom needed to hear: "You're not wasting your time." Rebecca had analyzed all the data he'd sent. She'd also consulted with other researchers and had pulled up everything the Earth Medical Database had on alien parasitic infections, which honestly wasn't much. But she'd found something interesting. There had been one case, decades ago, where a human researcher had encountered a similar, though not identical, parasitic situation with a creature on a research station near Alpha Centauri. The researcher had attempted something unconventional, a combination approach using multiple treatment methods applied in specific sequences rather than all at once. It hadn't worked perfectly, the creature had died anyway, but the researcher's notes suggested that if the timing and dosage had been adjusted, it might have made a difference. Rebecca laid out her thinking in the message. Conventional antiparasitic treatments wouldn't work because they were designed for Earth parasites with different biology. They needed to think about this differently. Instead of trying to kill all the parasites at once, which would trigger that immune cascade Tom feared, they needed to disrupt the parasite's life cycle. Break the cycle at its weakest point. Make it so the parasites couldn't reproduce, couldn't spread, couldn't maintain their network. It was going to require developing something completely new. Something tailored specifically to this creature's biology and this specific parasite ecosystem. They'd have to use the ship's resources creatively. They'd have to improvise. They'd have to break rules and bend protocols. But it might actually work. Tom felt something shift inside him. It was hope, mixed with determination and a healthy dose of terror. This was going to be the hardest thing he'd ever attempted. But for the first time since he'd found that creature in the cargo bay, he thought maybe, just maybe, they had a real shot at saving its life. Tom had been working in the medical bay for 6 days straight, and he was starting to hallucinate. He'd see words floating in the air that weren't there, and twice he'd caught himself having conversations with the computer that he couldn't quite remember. But he was too close to stop now. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning, though Tom honestly couldn't remember if it was morning or evening anymore. He was reviewing thermal imaging data when something clicked in his mind, something about the way the parasites responded to heat at specific temperatures. They weren't just dying randomly, they were entering a dormant state at certain heat levels, and that dormancy was temporary. That's when it hit him. Tom sat up so fast his coffee mug crashed to the floor. The parasites had a life cycle, just like Rebecca had said. And if he could disrupt that life cycle at the exact moment when they were most vulnerable, he might be able to break their hold on the creature without triggering the immune cascade. He started pulling data, cross-referencing thermal responses with the creature's own biological rhythms. Then he accessed the ship's medical manufacturing system and began programming a custom order for bioengineered bacteriophages, microscopic organisms specifically designed to attack the parasites when they were in their weakened state. But they'd need to be introduced at precisely the right time, with precise nutrient infusions to keep the creature's organs functioning while the treatment worked. It was insane. It was dangerous. It might not work at all. But it was the only chance they had. Tom spent the next 18 hours preparing everything. He named the creature Ember during this process. He wasn't sure why, except that there was something about the creature that reminded him of a flame that wouldn't quite go out, even when everything else was telling it to die. The name stuck. On the 7th day of treatment, Tom administered the first phase of his experimental protocol. He began with controlled thermal therapy, using specially calibrated heat blankets to bring Ember's body temperature to the exact level where the parasites would enter dormancy. At the same time, he started the nutrient infusions, carefully designed cocktails of minerals and compounds that would support Ember's organ function while keeping the creature sedated and stable. Then he introduced the bacteriophages. For the first few hours, nothing happened. Ember's vital signs remained stable but unchanged. Tom watched the monitors with his heart in his throat, wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake, if he'd just wasted resources on a procedure that wouldn't accomplish anything. But then, gradually, the readings started to shift. Ember's kidney function began to improve. The liver showed signs of recovering. The infection marker started dropping, slowly at first, then more noticeably. Tom watched the data stream across his screens and felt tears actually forming in his eyes. It was working. Against all odds, against everything the Velic had said was impossible, it was actually working. By the 10th day, Ember's eyes opened for the first time. They were clouded and confused, but they were open. The creature looked at Tom, and Tom swore there was recognition there, like Ember understood that someone had been fighting for his life. "Hey buddy," Tom whispered, placing his hand on Ember's shoulder. "You're going to be okay." But Tom's relief didn't last long. That afternoon, while he was monitoring Ember's progress and running additional scans, his communication console started beeping urgently. An incoming priority message from the Velic Collective. Tom's stomach tightened as he opened it. The message was cold and direct. The Velic had detected medical activity involving the creature they'd abandoned. They demanded to know what was happening. More than that, they demanded that the creature be terminated immediately. Keeping it alive was, according to Velic law, a violation of their property rights and their decision-making authority. They threatened to file a formal complaint with the Galactic Trade Commission. They threatened to sever all trade agreements with the Meridian and the company that owned it. They threatened to blacklist the ship from every Velic port in the galaxy. Tom's hands were shaking as he read through the message. This was bigger than him. This was bigger than just saving one creature. This involved money, politics, corporate interests, and interstellar relations. He knew he had to tell the captain. Captain Morrison's face went through several different shades of red as Tom stood in his office explaining what he'd done. The captain listened to the entire situation, from finding Ember to developing the treatment to the Velic's ultimatum, without saying a word. When Tom finished, there was a long silence that felt like it lasted forever. "You did what?" Morrison finally said, his voice quiet and dangerous. "You directly violated my orders, used ship resources without authorization, and now you've compromised our relationship with one of our most important trading partners?" "Sir, I saved a life." "You put this ship in jeopardy," Morrison interrupted. "The Velic don't make threats lightly, Doctor. If they blacklist us, we lose access to half our supply chain. That's jobs for this crew. That's money for the company. That's real consequences for real people. But even as Morrison said this, Tom could see the conflict in his face. The captain was a practical man, yes, but he wasn't heartless. Tom could see him wrestling with the situation, with what was right versus what was profitable. The news spread through the ship like wildfire. Half the crew thought Tom was a hero. They came by the medical bay to catch glimpses of Ember, who was getting stronger every day, his coat beginning to shine again, his eyes growing clearer and more aware. But the other half thought he was a fool who'd endangered their livelihoods for a worthless alien creature. Arguments broke out in the mess hall. Crew members took sides. Some people stopped speaking to Tom entirely. The ship that had felt like home was becoming divided, and it was all because Tom had refused to let something die when he thought he could save it. Tom sat with Ember one night, watching the creature's chest rise and fall with increasingly strong breaths, and wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake. Or if sometimes, the most important things required taking risks that other people couldn't understand. Tom knew he was running out of time. The Velic had given Captain Morrison a deadline. Either Ember would be terminated in 48 hours, or the trade agreements would be cancelled. The captain had been sympathetic but firm. He had a crew to think about, a company depending on him, and shareholders who wouldn't accept losing millions in revenue over one alien creature. Tom made a desperate decision. He reached out to an old contact from his days working in Galactic Medical Cooperation, a woman named Dr. Patricia Hoffman who worked as a coordinator for the Interstellar Ethics Council. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot he had. He explained everything to Patricia in a secure message. What he'd found, what he'd done, what was at stake. He sent her Ember's complete medical records, before and after images, all the data that documented the creature's recovery. Then he asked if there was any way at all, that the council could intervene. Patricia's response came back within hours. She'd reviewed everything and she was calling for an emergency arbitration hearing. The Interstellar Ethics Council would convene on the Meridian in 36 hours. It would be a formal proceeding with representatives from 7 different species present to hear arguments from both sides. The ruling would be binding under galactic law. It was happening fast and that terrified Tom. But it was also the only lifeline he had. The next day and a half was a blur of preparation. Tom worked with Patricia to prepare his presentation. He had to do more than just show Ember's medical recovery. He had to prove that Ember was intelligent, that Ember was sentient, that the Velic had knowingly abandoned a being capable of thought and feeling. If he could prove that, the whole situation changed legally and morally. When the arbitration council arrived, Tom had never seen anything quite like it. The conference room on the Meridian had been converted into a formal hearing space, and representatives from the Velic, the Terran Federation, the Zalthian Collective, the Epsilon Alliance, and 3 other species Tom couldn't quite pronounce filled the room. They sat across from each other like opposing forces in a war because in a way they were. The Velic representative went first. He was tall, with gray skin that seemed to ripple slightly as he spoke, and his voice was perfectly measured and emotionless. He explained that the creature had been deemed non-viable by Velic medical standards. It was property that had become a liability. The decision to abandon it had been logical and economical. What the human doctor had done was theft and violation of Velic sovereignty. The creature should be destroyed, and the human should face consequences for his actions. It was all very rational, very calm, very cold. Then it was Tom's turn. He stood up, and his voice shook slightly as he began. Your Honors, the Velic representative is right about one thing. I did violate orders. I did break protocol. But I did it for a reason, and I'm asking you to understand why. Tom walked them through the medical journey. He showed the before scans, the parasite ecosystem so complex that it had seemed impossible to treat. He showed the desperate attempts that failed. He showed the breakthrough that came from combining approaches in ways conventional medicine had never tried. And then he showed the results. Ember's organs were no longer failing. The parasite load had dropped by 98% and was continuing to decline. The creature's weight had increased from skeletal to healthy. The open sores had closed and healed. But more than that, Ember was awake, alert, and present. But I'm not just here to show you a medical recovery, Tom said, and he felt his confidence growing. I'm here because the Velic claim they abandoned property. But what if that property is actually a person? Tom activated the visual feed from the medical bay where Ember was resting. On the large screen the creature appeared. Ember's coat was now a beautiful golden color, shimmering in the medical bay lights. His eyes were clear and intelligent. As Tom began to speak, Ember turned his head and looked directly at the camera, directly at the council. Ember, Tom said, can you hear me? The creature made a sound, not quite a word, but clearly a vocalization that indicated understanding. Then Ember stood on his four legs, steady and strong, movements fluid and controlled. He walked across his recovery area with purpose. "Ember, I'm going to show you something," Tom said, and he displayed a series of images, first abstract shapes, then more complex patterns. Ember's eyes tracked each image with clear focus. His pupils dilated and contracted appropriately. His ears swiveled toward the sound of Tom's voice, responding to inflection and tone. Then Tom did something that made several of the council members lean forward in their seats. He asked Ember a series of yes or no questions, and taught the creature to respond by tapping his paw once for yes, twice for no. "Ember, are you in pain?" One tap. "Have you recovered?" One tap. "Do you understand that you are being judged by the council?" Ember hesitated, then one tap, deliberate and clear. The Zalthian representative, a being made of what looked like crystalline structures, spoke up. "This is remarkable. The creature is clearly demonstrating problem-solving ability and comprehension." A representative from the Epsilon Alliance, whose species communicated through color changes in their skin, shifted to a shade of deep blue that Tom had learned meant fascination. The Velic representative remained unmoved. "This is training. Sophisticated animals can be taught behaviors. It proves nothing." But Patricia stood up then, and Tom could see her eyes blazing with conviction. "With respect, it proves everything. Your own medical database, which I've reviewed, lists 17 indicators of sentience. This creature demonstrates at least 15 of them. The Velic Collective had the capacity to run these same tests. They had the same technology. They chose not to. They chose to assume the creature was incapable, and they abandoned it accordingly." She paused, letting that sink in. "But here's what troubles me most about this situation," Patricia continued. "If the Velic were willing to abandon a sentient being based on a superficial determination that it was unviable, what does that say about how they treat other species? What does that say about their values in the galactic community?" The room went silent. The political and ethical implications of what Patricia was saying hung in the air like a weight. The council deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the ruling was unanimous. Ember was declared a sentient being under galactic law, deserving of all the protections that status afforded. The Velic Collective was found to have violated multiple interstellar ethics codes by knowingly abandoning a sentient creature without attempting medical intervention. The Meridian and Dr. Tom Riley were exonerated of all charges. More significantly, the Velic's credibility in the galactic community took a serious hit. Other species began to question their practices, their ethics, their judgment. The Velic representative's face turned an even darker shade of gray as the ruling was announced. The Velic delegation left without comment, and Tom knew this wasn't over. There would be consequences and complications. But at least for now, Ember was safe. Tom looked at the screen showing Ember in the medical bay, and the creature seemed to understand something had changed. Ember stood tall, his head up, his golden coat shining under the lights. They'd done it. Against impossible odds, they'd proven that what everyone said couldn't be done was possible. And more importantly, they'd proven that sometimes, compassion and determination could change everything. The messages started arriving within days. Tom's communication console was flooded with offers from across the galaxy. The Zalthian Research Collective wanted him to lead their new xenobiological department. The Epsilon Alliance offered him a position as chief medical innovator with a salary that made Tom's head spin. 3 different universities wanted him as a professor. A pharmaceutical company from the outer colonies wanted to fund his research into alien parasite treatment. Every single offer was tempting. Every single one promised resources, funding, prestige, and the chance to help countless beings across the galaxy. Tom read through them all in his quarters, while Ember sat beside him, the creature's head resting on Tom's shoulder in a way that had become their normal evening ritual. "What do you think, buddy?" Tom asked, scratching behind Ember's ears. "Should I take one of these?" Ember made a low rumbling sound, something between a purr and a growl, that Tom had learned meant contentment. The creature didn't understand the words, but Ember understood Tom's tone, and that seemed to be enough. Tom realized something as he sat there with Ember in the quiet of his quarters. None of those offers felt right. They all wanted pieces of him, his expertise, his reputation, his innovation. But they didn't want what mattered most: the relationship he'd built with Ember, the understanding that had grown between them, the simple fact that they'd saved each other's lives. Tom sent a message to Captain Morrison asking for a meeting. The captain's office felt different now, less like a place of conflict and more like neutral ground. Morrison had been quiet through the whole aftermath of the council's ruling, But Tom sensed something had shifted in him. The captain had seen something that day, proof that doing the right thing even when it cost something mattered. "I've been thinking about my future," Tom said without preamble. "I've got offers from all over the galaxy." Morrison nodded slowly. "You deserve them. You did something extraordinary." "I know," Tom said. "But I'm not taking any of them." The captain raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "I want to stay with the Meridian," Tom continued. "But I want to propose something different. What if we converted one of the research labs into a center for xenological medicine? What if we made the Meridian into a traveling research vessel, a place where we document alien medical cases, develop new treatment protocols, and train other doctors in how to approach medicine across species lines?" Tom leaned forward. "The galaxy is full of species that don't understand each other's biology. The Velic almost killed Ember because they didn't know how to help him. But what if we changed that? What if we made it our mission to bridge that gap?" Captain Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then a small smile appeared on his face. "You know what? I think the company would actually go for that. It's noble enough to satisfy the ethics committees, and different enough that we could market it as a unique service. Plus, it keeps my best doctor from leaving." Over the next month, the Meridian was transformed. One of the larger cargo bays was converted into a state-of-the-art research facility. Tom assembled a small team, specialists in different fields of medicine and biology who were interested in xenological work. They began documenting Ember's complete recovery, creating a comprehensive guide that other doctors could use if they encountered similar parasitic infections. But the real work was just beginning. News of Tom and Ember's story spread throughout the galactic community faster than anyone expected. Species that had never worked together before started reaching out. A Ziphian trader offered to bring injured or sick creatures to the Meridian for treatment. The Zalthian collective sent research data on their own medical challenges. The Epsilon Alliance offered to fund expeditions to help beings across different star systems. 6 months after the council ruling, Tom received his first emergency call. A merchant vessel had a crew member, a being from a species the humans had never encountered before, who was suffering from a mysterious illness. They didn't know if a human doctor could help, but they were willing to try. Tom worked with his team for 48 hours straight, using every technique they developed with Ember as a foundation. They studied the alien's biology, ran scans, consulted with medical experts from a dozen different species. And slowly they figured it out. The alien was suffering from a mineral deficiency that was specific to their species' physiology. Something simple once you understood it, but something that would have been fatal without intervention. The alien survived. That was the first of many cases. A Vrelian creature with a viral infection. A silicon-based being from the deep colonies with a crystalline degradation problem. A collective consciousness from the hive world struggling with a synchronization disorder. Each case was different. Each case required improvisation, creativity, and the willingness to think beyond conventional medicine. Tom and Ember became known throughout the galaxy not just as the doctor and creature who'd survived an impossible medical case, but as pioneers of a new kind of medicine. They traveled to research stations and colony worlds. They trained other doctors in xenological approaches. They documented everything, creating a growing database of knowledge that could help countless beings. But what Tom valued most wasn't the recognition or the accolades. It was the moment when a young Zalthian doctor came to him and said, "I want to do what you do. I want to learn to help creatures across species lines." It was knowing that Ember had become an ambassador to the galaxy, not just as a symbol of what could be achieved, but as a living, breathing reminder that compassion mattered. Every time someone looked at Ember's golden coat, at the strength in the creature's movements, at the intelligence in those eyes, they saw proof that giving up was never the answer. One evening, Tom sat on the observation deck of the Meridian with Ember beside him. They were heading toward a new colony that had sent out a distress call about a medical emergency. Tom didn't know what they'd find, didn't know if they could help. But that had never stopped him before. "You know what I realized?" Tom said quietly to Ember. "The Velic were wrong about something fundamental. They thought logic and efficiency were all that mattered. That if something seemed impossible, you gave up. But humans, we have something different. We have the stubborn refusal to accept impossible. We have compassion that makes us willing to try even when the odds are terrible. And we have hope." Ember turned his head and looked at Tom, and in that look was understanding, connection, and gratitude. "The Velic thought they were the advanced ones," Tom continued, scratching behind Ember's ears. "But maybe our real strength isn't in our technology or our logic. Maybe it's in our heart. Maybe it's in the fact that we see something suffering and we can't turn away. We just can't. The stars streamed past as the Meridian moved through space, carrying a doctor and his patient, now partners in a mission that was changing the galaxy one being at a time. They'd proven that the impossible was just another word for something that hadn't been tried the right way yet. And that sometimes, the greatest power in the universe wasn't measured in weapons or wealth or status. It was measured in the simple, unstoppable human will to save a life.